All right, thanks, Chris. Good morning. I hope all of you are coffeeed up and ready to spend another exciting day with the FCC on a whole bunch of topics. Uh, and ready. Well, as Chris said, I guess getting ready for the 10th anniversary celebration and to kick off the events, we thought it might be a good idea this year to have some perspective for some of you who've been here since the beginning of the program. It'll be kind of an interesting reminder. But to kick off the proceedings for the FCC today, we invited my boss. Let's try to show him that we do some work once in a while in the lab to come and give an overview on some of the things that are going on. And maybe even he was at the beginning of the TCB program, heavily involved with some of the early rulemakings and others. So he probably has even better perspective on things than I do. So without any further ado, let me introduce Julius Knapp, who's been the chief of the Office of Engineering and Technology, and let him take you through some of the history and where we are going in the future for the program. Julie?
Thank you, Rashmi. Good morning, everybody. First, just to see how much energy there is in the room. How many went to the Yankees game last night? Yeah, that ended sometime around 11 o'clock, something like that. And for the rest of you in the Inner Harbor? So if some of you doze, I understand. I just can't tell you how impressed I am from having been involved from where this started. I took, just at the number of folks that are involved, so I took a photo of the room with my Android phone. And if there's an app on here that tells you, it takes a picture, it tells you what you're looking at. I won't tell you what it came up with. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the program and some of the things that are going on at the FCC. It's hard to believe the 10-year anniversary of the program and the first grant being issued by a TCB. Before the TCB program started, there was only one place to obtain an equipment certification. That was at the FCC lab. And the time it took really varied depending on the number of applications that were coming in the door, what the staffing was like at the time, and what our workload was. And the program here, like I think around the world, had a domestic focus. We were doing spectrum issues internationally through the ITU, but all of the equipment approval programs around the world, at least it was my perception, really just had a domestic focus. There was very little collaboration with the stakeholders, the manufacturers, the labs, and so forth. We talked individually, but there really weren't too many forums, maybe the IEEE EMC symposia, but not much elsewhere to really talk about equipment approval issues. But there were strong motivations for change that were brewing, particularly in the late 80s, early 90s. One was to better facilitate trade. And it took us a few years. We developed the first mutual recognition agreement between the United States and Europe, and others followed. People started to focus on harmonization of, or desire for harmonization of product approval programs around the world. And everybody wanted to reduce the time to market. When I started my career a while back, usually products had at least a 2 to 3 year life cycle. Now it seems like it's 2 to 3 months. Now the process, the way it looks today, we've currently got 34 TCBs around the world, and there's two new applicants. The time to market has been drastically reduced. The equipment authorization has a worldwide focus, and there's extensive collaboration between the stakeholders. So I mean, I look at this room and think this is terrific. You know, we've got people who are involved, both the laboratories, the people who are doing the certifications, open to the producers as well, all having a place to have a dialogue and try to be on the same page. So if you look at what that's meant to the program, and I come from a time where we were doing 8,000 to 10,000 applications a year at the lab. And when we had problems in a program, we went through a period we were testing nearly all of the personal computers that first came on the market. Everything would back up. Now, as you can tell from the chart, we're somewhere around 98% of the grants are done by TCBs. And we're roughly about 11,000 certifications a year. I can't imagine what the delay would look like if all those were still coming through our lab. So how well has this worked? I think generally it's been outstanding. It really has been, a win-win for everybody. We do have ongoing challenges. One is just keeping pace with the technology. I'll talk more about that a little later on. Keeping pace with the FCC rule changes. Trying to make sure that we have consistency of the review among the TCBs so that we don't have people forum shopping. Another challenge is ongoing audits of product compliance. It's one thing to get things done quickly, but if in the end things that are on the market aren't compliant, that's not a good indicator of success. Last summer, the Commission went out with a wireless innovations inquiry. I put the docket numbers up here. I'm guessing most of you in the room know how to look these things up. The FCC has an electronic comment filing system. It's been updated. It's much better than it had been. So you can get on the FCC's website, and you can look under electronic filing, get to the electronic comment filing system, put in the docket numbers, and you can see the records of everything everybody had to say. We asked about possible changes and improvements to the equipment authorization process. We asked about whether certification should be relaxed from certification to declaration of conformity for certain devices, whether we might reshape what we call declaration of conformity to better match what goes on in other parts of the world. We got a number of comments, but there's been no decisions reached yet, and I don't really expect us to get back to this particular issue very quickly. You'll understand that in a minute. Why not? So the biggest issue that the Commission has been working on, or maybe neck and neck between this and the Open Internet proceeding, which is sometimes referred to as net neutrality, has been the National Broadband Plan. How many of you have actually taken a look at the broadband plan? Have any idea? Okay, so that's a handful. This is it. It's about 360 pages. The big interest in Washington before it came out was how many pages it was going to be. Would it be 1,000, et cetera. So Congress had directed the Commission to develop a national broadband plan. I won't read through all of this. You've got the slides. But basically to make sure that people across the country had access to broadband that would be at robust speeds, and that it would also serve national purposes, such as healthcare, jobs, energy improvements, etc. The goals that have been set in the broadband plan are the following. At least 100 million U.S. homes should have affordable access to actual download speeds of 100 megabits per second and actual upload speeds of at least 50 megabits per second. This is actually by 2020, was that target. One of the things in conjunction with this is that we found in the analysis for the broadband plan that the advertised speeds aren't always what you get. In fact, sometimes they're about half of that. So one of the things that we're trying to do is develop measurement methods that can provide some consistency for consumers so they understand what it is that they're getting, and the object of that is so that there's better competition. Goal number 2, U.S. should lead the world in mobile innovation with the fastest and most extensive wireless networks of any nation. Goal 3, every American should have affordable access to robust broadband service and the means and skills to subscribe to it if they choose to do so. The number one reason, as it turned out, that people didn't take broadband was the cost. So work was done looking at the price sensitivity. A lot of people have no idea what they're paying for broadband if they have it. Turns out that the knee in the curve comes around $20. People would be willing to pay. Goal number 4, every American community should have affordable access to service of at least 1 gigabit per second to anchor institutions such as schools, hospitals, and government buildings. Goal 5, to ensure the safety of the American people, every first responder should have access to nationwide wireless, interoperable broadband public safety networks. And lastly, to ensure that America leads in clean energy, every American should be able to use broadband to track and manage their real-time energy consumption by 2020. About the only way that I have to do it right now is to go outside and look at the meter and see it spinning around. And the idea here is that if people understood what energy they're consuming at the time and then could put in systems, mainly wireless, to manage their energy consumption, it would reduce that. So why a national broadband plan? Because it's viewed as the great infrastructure challenge of the early 21st century. Similar to the development of the transcontinental railroads in the 1860s, rural electrification in the 1930s, the interstate highways in the 1950s, and now we're on to broadband. We found some gaps in the broadband ecosystem. 14 million Americans don't have access to broadband infrastructure that can support today's and tomorrow's applications. 93 million Americans do not have broadband at home. Many Americans lack digital skills, even as many job openings are posted exclusively online. In other words, a lot of institutions are only posting the job openings online. So if you don't have access to broadband, you don't have access to knowing about and being able to apply to those jobs. And we rank at the bottom half of comparable countries on nearly every metric to measure the adoption of health information technology. And most of the United States electric grid is not connected to broadband. Now, I'm just going to focus on one chapter out of this plan, and that's spectrum. And that's because I think it's probably the chapter that affects you the most. Spectrum is really the oxygen that wireless broadband needs to thrive. We've got spectrum-hungry or bandwidth-hungry devices. The smartphones that have come on the market in the last few years are consuming about 30 times the bandwidth that the predecessor devices had consumed. And the netbooks are consuming about 450 times the bandwidth. When you look at the supply side, the spectrum that the FCC has made available, allocated and licensed, I won't sing to that. Allocated and licensed is only about a 3-fold increase. So the gap you have, pick your number, is between a 30-fold increase in consumption and a 3-fold increase in spectrum. So somehow we have to close this. Improvements in spectrum efficiency are going to have to be part of the equation. That's a given, but it's still not enough to close this gap. You look at, just in a few years here the jargon of the apps and what that's created in terms of both what consumers are using and the economy for the providers. So now people are using their devices and they look at all the cool things that they might be able to do, which just further drives up the demand for bandwidth.